SABC News has been reliably informed that President Cyril Ramaphosa has indeed fired two of the senior NPA advocates, Nomgcobo Jiba and Mrwebi. Let's make sense of the story a little bit now, and we're joined on the line by constitutional law analyst Phephelaphi Dube. Phephelaphi, thank you so much for the time. It's not surprising, really, is it, that we certainly have this decision by the president?
No, I think the decision does not come as much of a surprise, given the fact that there have already been adverse findings against the pair, findings that have been made by both the High Court as well as the Supreme Court of Appeal. So in that sense, they would have had to have an uphill task in terms of convincing the Nomgcobo Commission to come to a different conclusion from that of the courts.
Yeah. Phephelaphi, then what happens from here on? I mean, what is the process then? Does the president has officially taken them out of office officially? Does that still need to be put forward to, of course, Parliament, etc.? Must they accept the decision, or is this just final?
It's not yet final. In terms of the NPA Act, that's the piece of legislation that governs the workings of the National Prosecuting Authority, Parliament then has to ratify the President's decision. But of course, it means that Parliament isn't necessarily bound by the decision of the President. They can, of their own volition, choose to disregard the President's finding. And if that's the case, then it means that they'll be reinstated to their positions. But of course, bearing in mind the partisan nature of our Parliament, bearing in mind that the majority of the members are drawn for the ranks of the governing party, it's highly unlikely that they're going to take a different stance from the head of their party.
Yeah, so the avenues then to go in a different direction for Jiba and Mrwebi in order to perhaps even challenge the decision. Is there any recourse for them by any chance, and a way for them back into this whole mess?
Well, they may very well challenge the decision before the courts, but of course such challenge again is going to be an uphill task, in the sense that I think on the merits they wouldn't have a very strong case, but perhaps they could argue on the technicalities, they could argue on the process, perhaps take into consideration the fact that there is a process that's already before the Constitutional Court. So perhaps they could argue that, this parallel process affects the extent to which they can enjoy their rights to access the courts. But again, it would be very difficult for a court to come to a different conclusion.
Okay, so in terms of these commissions then, what powers do they actually hold with regards to their recommendations? I mean, the president has now followed two of them in particular, the one into the abilities of Tom Moyane as Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, and now with regards to the fitness to hold office for both Mrwebi and Jiba. Are their powers necessarily binding, or does this just set that precedent moving forward?
Well, their powers aren't binding, but of course we need to bear in mind that the president, in exercising any kind of power, is bound by the principle of rationality. So the question is always, is it a rational decision for the president to disregard the findings of the commission? And I think in this instance, the fact that there's been this overwhelming evidence, the fact that we already have court decisions, it would therefore be arguably irrational for the president to disregard those findings and come to a different conclusion from that has already been arrived at by the commissions. So in a sense, the commissions play a very important role in terms of, just having a specific focus on certain matters which are of great public interest to the nation.
Is this really the end, though, Phephelaphi? And my question in this regard relates to the fact that if they treated people incorrectly, and of course, politically, driven by politically sensitive cases with regards to Richard Mdluli, of course, and KZN Hawks, Johan Boysen, is this the last step with regards to this? So they've been fired. Is this the end of the saga? Could there be further prosecutorial matters that happen with regards to this? Is there a potential for court dates and the like as well? What exactly happens with regards to that?
Well, I think bearing in mind the nature of their misconduct, the fact that they attempted to lead the courts, the fact that I think Jiba had signed an affidavit under oath, and yet that affidavit was, or just some of the allegations were proven to be false. And bearing in mind that she's an advocate and she's an officer of the court. So in that sense, she has a special duty towards the court. She has a special duty to assist the court to come to a certain conclusion, which is derived from, just telling the truth. So in that sense, having found that the courts as well as the commission itself has found that she misconducted herself, I think that may very well open her up to certain criminal charges. But of course, going forward, it just depends on whether or not the NPA has the appetite to perhaps go after her.
Yeah, and I suppose that'll be the question then, right? We'll certainly await. Do they actually go on against them and after them in regards to this? Just in your expert opinion, as a final question then, Phephelaphi, do you think then that it has given these inquiries just a little more credence, a little more independence, and perhaps made them seem a little more credible as well with regards to those inquiries?
Well, absolutely, in the sense that these are stories that have been in the press for more than a decade, and it would appear as if certain politically connected individuals who were connected to former President Jacob Zuma appeared to be enjoying a certain degree of immunity. So I think these findings go some way in terms of assuring the South African public that everyone should be treated equally before the law. But of course, I think the important test is really to also consider, have a broader picture and to also consider some of the allegations that are coming out of the State Capture Commission and to see what exactly is going to happen going forward. But I think nonetheless, this is an important first step in terms of ensuring the South African public that everybody is equal before the law.
Yeah, first step indeed. And we certainly hope in many cases that people are, of course, held to account for not only the decisions they make, but the repercussions of those decisions as well. And it can go even further than just being fired from your job as well, if the need is there, of course. Well, Phephelaphi Dube, we do appreciate your time. She's a constitutional law analyst, and hopefully we'll continue to get more stories. That is our breaking news story, of course. Just to recap that, President Cyril Ramaphosa firing controversial senior advocates from the National Prosecuting Authority there. That's Nomgcobo, Jiba and Mrwebi. We'll continue to get more details on that. Of course, this follows what has been a 6-week trial or inquiry into their fitness to hold office there that was led by retired Judge Yvonne Mrwebi on that one. So it is quite interesting to note all those details, and we'll continue to unpack it, as I said, a little bit later on. Let's move on.